So let's jump into yet another Patreon listener question for Transformers Slag podcast. Once again, if you are interested in being part of the Transformers Slag Patreon, check the description below. We have a whole bunch of cool stuff that you could get when you join the Patreon, whether it be icons, whether it be a Discord, whether it be the listener question you could be part of. We even have little gift baskets for people who join after a certain tier. And one of those legendary patrons we have here, DownrightSuperb, one of our legendary patrons, he asks, and this is a really good question actually because there's a lot to discuss here. It's a two-part question. So the first part of it is, this may be a bit of a general discussion. Would this be a valuable sales strategy for Hasbro? Is reproduction programs or discontinued figures possible? Let's say they could put in an order for past figures, but only figures that meet a certain threshold go into productions. Maybe these figures could be shipped in a low-cost packaging, and you pay up front so they won't produce and ship they won't be produced and shipped for that year, maybe next year. So that's the first part of the question. So what essentially he's saying is, if they created some kind of a program where a specific figure in the past of Transformers reaches a certain request level and reaches that threshold, could it go into production? The problem with that is, and I remember like the best example of like low production figures, we'll start with that, is something like Bakon. Bakon, to my knowledge, the average year figures would be as low as 500 units and as high as 3,000, if I remember correctly. And what that did was that led to, because of those production costs and everything, and essentially how it works is the lower the production numbers, the higher it costs to make the product. That's essentially always how it is, because the more times you have to fire up the machine and do more stuff, it becomes cheaper in the long run. This applies with almost anything. You always see like the old saying, buy more, save. It's kind of the same thing here when it comes to production of a figure. So it's kind of the same thing here, where for Hasbro, it's more worth it for them to produce 10,000 to 20,000 units of a product, because then they could realistically charge $19.99 for a deluxe, and it works out better for them from a profit margin. Where when Fun Publication gets them to do a 3,000 unit item, which, I mean, when you think about it, is nothing in terms of numbers, but for 3,000 units they have to make that deluxe, and then they charge like $50 for that deluxe. And it's the same thing that's kind of happening with what we're seeing with the crossover stuff with Back to the Future, or even when they do those limited Hasbro Pulse stuff. Those are the smaller unit products, and that's why some of them have larger price tags on them, because they know that they're only going to make maybe 3,000, 4,000 units. So using that as a grounding of understanding how that works, it then goes to the fact where, okay, so we get a bunch of fans together, right? And we go, you know what, we all really want, I don't know, let me think of something that could be reissued from them. I'm just turning my head right now. Like, we all want Ravage X9 from Beast Wars, right? The Ravage X9, extremely tough to get today, transmetal retool that was only available in Japan for the Beast Wars line. It was originally a deluxe-sized figure. I believe I'd have to get the box out. I believe the yen on that one was, I want to say 1,900, which comes to about, especially back then, came to about, I want to say $15 American. So, original MSRP 15 American, more or less 1,900 yen. You then go, okay, so if Hasbro would do, let's say, like they say, okay, it has to hit a threshold of 3,000 people. They'd have to get those 3,000 to pay up front. And again, a deluxe scale, especially of that quality of plastic back then, as opposed to what we're used to today, which is actually a lot less. We're talking something that would probably cost them maybe, that would honestly, I would see them charging like $30 to $40 for it. No joke. For something that originally was $15 back then. And I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, go back to any of my finance videos and see how Hasbro handles, price points today, especially when it comes to different plastic qualities and how they've had to diminish things throughout the years. But yeah, let's say they put it in a very low-cost box, which we see today now. I mean, that's what the Hasbro Pulse box is. And if you're a Canadian, a lot of those Hasbro Pulse products actually show up in Toys R Us, and they're just plain brown boxes with very few indications of what's in there outside of a sticker saying Chromar on the outside. So those low production cost packaging already exist in the market. So let's say that they do, Ravage X9, they put in a low production cost box, and they say, look, we're not going to do this until we hit a threshold of 3,000, and you have to put $50 up front. It's a possibility. Something like that could exist. I almost feel that's kind of like, that's something I think they're going to test water with in the future with HasLab. Because while Unicron is quite an opposite spectrum of that example, like that's like a big expensive item that's not a reissued product, it's a brand new tooling, and it was a lot of money when it was all said and done for a lot of people. The flip side of it is they could do like a HasLab thing where it could be a small product that's low cost, and they just need to hit a threshold for it to happen. It's just we don't have an example of it. You add a reissue kind of skew to it where it's already tooling that exists and it doesn't cost them any money because the tooling is already there, especially if it's in CAD. When everything's done in CAD afterwards, it's just a file at that point, just waiting to be unearthed. I could see it happening, though. I could see it happening. It's just a matter of what is that sweet spot threshold number. That's the problem, because I look back at, the more expensive stuff. Like they needed 3,000 units to make the Pretender Shell Grand Max happen, and they didn't hit it in Japan. Mind you, I think it was an international order. But in general, it didn't get hit. So right away it shows that. And the flip side of it is when you have those kind of things, sometimes there is an interest, sometimes there isn't an interest. Now, retail Transformers, they're made in the tens of thousands. There's so many units of it. It's absolutely insane. If you actually sat down and just counted how many Walmarts there are and even if every Walmart just got one case of something of 4 figures or whatever of each individual figure. And I think, I'm just going to Google this right now just quickly, just for the hell of it, right here. So let's see, how many Walmarts in USA? We're not even going to talk Canada and the world. According to this, there's about 4,800 Walmarts in the United States. So if you assume that there's 4 of each figure in every, 4 of each, like a case of figures has 4 of each individual figure, but then they usually get a pallet case of 4, so that means they usually get 4 of each character, so that means 4 times 4,800, which leads to almost 20,000 of just a figure. And that's assuming they just get that one pallet case, which is not the case. There's obviously more, and that's just talking Walmart. Then we're talking Target. Then we're talking, all the smaller, individual stores and mom and pop stores and online stores. And then we're just talking the United States, let alone Canada and the UK and everywhere else. Easily a single retail product sometimes hits as much as almost 1 million units around the world. And that's why I always laugh about, sometimes people, they worry about, getting a product when you have to understand there's millions of them out there for a lot of retail stuff. Obviously, this, it doesn't, when you get into the larger price points like a Triptychon and Omega Supreme and the Titan class, there's a lot less of those. But, when you're talking a deluxe, there's millions of them. So Hasbro, it's so worth it for them when they produce 1 million of a unit for them to charge $19.99. When you're talking 3,000, 5,000, they got to raise that price now. And then when you're doing reproduction, which is like looking at using tooling and plastics and I guess the width of plastic and, just the design and how it's a more expensive design, even though it was a product that originally was like $15, then it enters a whole new atmosphere. That's why, we look at, I always compare, you look at G1 reissue Optimus Prime that's in stores, and just the cab is given to us, not even the trailer, and it's $39.99. And it's like, man, like just like not even the trailer. So like that's what happens when you have to go back in time, and even though the old tooling is there, because of how the design is so not favorable to how they do things today in terms of plastic and materials, that it has to be way more expensive. And a G1 Optimus Prime, yeah, that'll sell, so they're willing to go back in time and do that and do a reproduction. But it's something where they know they could probably sell 10,000 units of that. They know that they could go back. It's a long answer to that, but I could see it working, but it's really going to have to be a marriage of a good product that's worth going back and reissuing for them, mixed with what they feel is the right number. Because if they tried to do like a threshold program, it would have to be such a high number. It really would be. Look, Unicron, I mean, I don't care what anyone says. That HasLab, sometimes I wonder if it even did really reach 8,000 units. Like maybe they just padded it out. But if you couldn't get Unicron, even at that high price point, if you couldn't get 8,000 people to get behind Unicron, how many people could you get behind a Ravage X9? Even if you're going to charge $50 to $60 to make it happen. Even though like a Ravage X9 and to buy one in the secondary market today is about $200. Last I checked, could change. But the point is that it's something that I don't know. It's going to be a difficult one because Hasbro has such a weird state of mind now with how they handle their products, and they're always worried about losing money in a very volatile toy industry today with not as many platforms to sell anymore. It's a question that I would have loved to have Aaron Archer also, because even though he doesn't work with them anymore, he knows that at least back then, they did a Beast Wars reissue line when they were, the 10th anniversary line back then, and that wasn't a success, oddly enough. So we'll see what happens with that. The second part of the question here, alternatively, could we see something like this that's scaled back in production, where you could ship a partly assembled product to save on cost? People could assemble their own figures as a kit for a lower price. So actually Takara Tomy tried this with the Transformers Prime line back in 2012, I believe it was, where they did the Arms Micron line, which it was like you got the figure itself, but the weapon had to be assembled like a Gunpla model kit or a Gundam model kit. And it wasn't received very well because while Bandai has made zillions of dollars off of their whole Gundam industry and people buying kits, and like literally like Bandai cut out the middleman and was like, hey, we'll just make the runners of these model kits of the action figure, and instead of getting someone in a factory and paying them to put the figure together and paint it and screw it together and everything, we're just going to throw it in a box and make the customer do all the work for us. And they made millions of dollars doing that. The problem is that they conditioned their audience for their product, for their pop culture icon, to be used to doing something like that over a span of, no joke, like almost 40 years now. It's very hard to get Transformer fans to kind of get used to that. It's kind of like how Transformer fans just aren't even used to stuff that doesn't transform, and how that's almost sacrilege, even though it's been around for years in small parts. Look, they've tried, there was Kabaya Transformer kits, where they were little model kits that you build together of Transformer characters. They found very limited interest. They've tried with, right now we have the brand new model kits by Flame Toys. I turned my head, that's why my voice changed from the camera there, because I'm looking at all of my model kits of it, and they get modest to tepid interest. Because they're so low cost to do these kits, because again, it comes off of the factory runners and then thrown into a box, and the customer's expected to do all the work afterwards. They're low cost to make. But the sad truth is that they're low cost to make, but they're also not reaching a huge audience as they had hoped. But because they're so low cost to make, they're not really losing too much money either. For Transformers to make a complete shift of doing that, especially when you're talking, stuff that's more complicated, people want more complicated, more accurate, like imagine building a masterpiece, like imagine that has a transformation ability. the equivalency of it, and a lot of people won't be able to relate to it, but it's like, perfect grade Gundam Zeta Gundam, which had a very simple transformation. It was a transforming robot, but it was a very simple transformation, but it still was a very complicated thing to build and put together. And it just doesn't have the paint applications and everything that people would expect of, say, a masterpiece Transformer. I really can't see our demographic, our market, our fandom wanting to go in that direction, considering that we've been, drop-fed small examples of that with very little positive reception. I like the Kabaya kits for what they are, but they're low-cost, 300 yen, small little kits, and I accept them for what they are. They're fun little things to do in an afternoon with a bunch of friends. Like we all just get around and build some kits or something. But I mean, I used to do that at BotCon. There's some footage out there. I think Vangelis has the footage from BotCon 2010 where we just went down to the bar and I built a whole bunch of Kabaya kits. Just alcohol and Transformers. But the point is that, to me, I don't really see that market becoming a more mainstream thing because this fandom has a weird kind of relationship with it, and at the end of the day it's all about the money that's made, and the money is not there. It really isn't. I love Gundam kits, don't get me wrong, but I also recognize the grander picture of things and how while Gundam fans, and I hang out with Gundam fans, they love that stuff. Transformer fans, it's kind of a niche thing to them. They're not really into that. They rather buy, if they're going to spend like, $50, $60, they rather get like a lower end masterpiece figure than building a model kit. And the sad truth is, the model kit industry is, for as big as it is for Gundam, it's niche for every other franchise, including Macross, which probably would be the closest second place, but it's still a distant second. And then, man, I can't even really think of any others that really, like, they have kits, but they're not, like, doing insanely well. Like they did the Dragon Ball model kits. Those kind of, like, tanked after a while. Because what's the point when Dragon Ball fans expect to just get really nice SH figure arts and stuff? So it's a complicated one because then, like the beginning of what you said, it's a general discussion where you kind of find yourself comparing to other markets and everything because of how it's the only way you could kind of understand it is by reflecting on how other companies have done it. But yeah, the long short answer of that one is I don't see them doing it because it's been not received well in the past, and I don't see them doing it today, especially with the American market. I really don't see that. Japanese market, they tried exclusively with the Japanese market with Arms Micron, and it wasn't received well. People didn't really care about it, and they never did it again. So it's something that if there was interest, they would have continued giving it to us in some shape or form. But Arms Micron was almost, like 7-8 years ago, and we haven't seen anything like it since in mainline. So it tells us a lot about how well received that was. But yeah, that's that. Again, thanks again for the listener question. Downright Superb. It was a really good one. I like these kind of questions that really make us kind of have to think about stuff and look at the history and everything, and look at the numbers and talk about all the finance stuff in relation to Transformers too, because people need to understand how a lot of that stuff works. But yeah, hey, great question. And once again, if you are interested in being part of the Transformers Slag Patreon, like Downright Superb over here, just be sure to check the description below and click on support the podcast under the Patreon thing and check out all the cool stuff we have to offer everyone.